This breakout session is really supposed to be more of like a big picture overview of how learning works, because we offer this class like usually once a year. We'll probably wait until the summer to offer it because we've been working with Western so that we can do a condensed 3-day class and you guys can get like credit for that. So anyway, this is really just an overview, but we are going to dig into a few topics so that hopefully you can walk away with 1 or 2 things that you could implement in your classroom. All right, translating science of teaching and learning research is actually really hard work. So why should we invest the effort? Well, once upon a time medicine was practiced without science as well. This is whenever we had things like, hi guys, come on in. Let me grab you a packet and you can just sit down wherever you'd like.
Oh, he's a bully.
I think he even said that in his introduction.
I'm going over here.
Pepper, do you want to introduce yourself and where you teach and what you teach? Oh yeah.
What is that?
This is something that's going to follow me around.
Okay, how does it follow you?
It has this thing.
Whoa!
Yeah, so I think they're posting the recordings.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I teach at Cedar Ridge High School, and I teach art.
Yeah, we're so excited for you to be here.
Who are you? There's somebody else that's not a Cedar Ridge.
Oh, I'm Pepper.
So we were just discussing that it's actually a lot of hard work to translate the research that's being done into actual classroom practices, and why invest the effort. And I'm making the point that once upon a time medicine was practiced without the benefit of science as well. And this is when we had some what we know now as really radical practices, and not just the leeches and bloodletting, but drinking urine to help your liver, curing seizures and headaches by drilling holes into your skull without being under anesthesia. Like, some really wild things happened. And it's my hypothesis that 50 years from now, people are going to look back at some of the things that we did thinking that we were being really helpful, that weren't actually helping kids, and that we can be a lot more effective with the little time that we have if we include the research that's happening into our educational practices. And this is just a quote I like to put up there that is, I don't remember who said it, so I can't give them credit, but if our brains were so simple that we could understand them, we wouldn't be able to. And I just want to acknowledge that our job as educators is to try to understand not just what's happening in one complex brain, but in over 100 complex brains in a day, and try to help guide all of those complex systems in the same direction. And so what we're trying to do is super challenging. Our objective for today is to apply research to affect student motivation and increase long-term storage through elaborate encoding and productive struggle. And again, I just want to mention that How Learning Works is a playbook that covers a lot of topics, but I felt like these two gave a really nice overview of what you could expect if you chose to take the class. Okay, so how do our brains actually learn? These are 2 models that we use to convey the same message. I'm hoping the one on the left looks familiar from Deans of Impact and the effortful thinking work that we've been doing, but I'm going to give you just a minute, and I'd like you to think about what are the connections between those 2 graphics. Sorry, that's not in your book yet. And like, how are those 2 images saying the same thing? All right, if you would take just a minute, we'll start. Like, we've definitely got a table over here and a group of 3 here. So if you could start with the person closest to the door, just sharing some of your thoughts, even if it's not fully developed yet. How are those communicating the same thing?
12-ish little things.
I mean,
And when we're working memory,
sometimes you're breaking down three or four parts.
Ah.
And working memory is trying to condense it.
Lock it into a long-term memory.
And then long-term
And we
memory,
hopefully have
things
it
are right.
two-way valve, and I'll go back.
Yes, yes, that is the hope. What's the electrical connector that only lets it go one way? We're hoping it's not that.
I like how the one device has multiple arrows in the right, which applies to your condensed process.
You nailed it. I don't have anything to add.
Divided and then applied to
Retrieval,
other things that you already have stored.
Yeah.
And looking into previous study.
Well, I'm already really excited about the things that I'm hearing you guys say. Mr. Cannon, I did not get to hear your thought fully, so I look forward to hearing that in just a minute if you're okay with sharing it. But the point that this group made that I was really glad to hear is that we do have a lot of stimulus coming from the environment and our sensory memory, and we have this bottleneck that happens whenever we decide what are like the 3 to 4 things that we're actually gonna think effortfully about in our working memory. And then it goes from working memory, hopefully, into our long-term capacity. And Mr. Grimson made the point that we're hoping this is a two-way valve, so that we can get it out of long-term memory back to working memory, and not just stored into long-term memory to get dusty. And what were you saying, Mr. Cannon?
I like how the visual shows the working memory branching off while going into long-term capacity, because we're taking those 3 to 4 things, and we're deciding, okay, this is useful here, 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 but not there. This part is useful, like, because we can apply things in multiple prior experiences that we already have
I love that.
in our model that we already have going on in life.
Yes, not just that this new thing can go in this one place, but hopefully we're making multiple connections. I love that. Excellent point. I knew I wanted to hear all of your thought. Okay, so where does motivation fit in this model? Well, I propose that we require motivation to attend to a priority incoming information. So, like most of us teach, well, we all teach secondary. So we know that our students have a lot of social priorities. We know that many of our students have trauma that's affected or even takes up multiple spaces in their working memory. We know that students have a lot of different priorities, and our academic goals for them are not always at the top of the list. And so it requires motivation on their part to attend to the academic goals that we have for them, but it also requires motivation to persevere in working memory, to continue to think about something and think about it effortlessly and build multiple connections so that when we store it in long-term memory, it's not just going to a single place if it's going there at all. So I kind of point to that bottleneck between sensory memory and working memory, and that's where we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about motivation. But really, it requires motivation to persevere in extracting information from long-term memory as well. So it really covers the whole model, but we're going to kind of focus in on this space right here. Okay, so this, a picture from How Learning Works is on the first page of your handout. And I've just summarized those things here on the screen. One of the most impactful places for research is it tells us where to put our time. So they've already studied how each of these areas affect student motivation, and they're all positive effects or they wouldn't be on here. But for me, I'm going to look at that and go, where am I going to get the most bang for my buck? So I'm going to let you guys look through the 6 ideas there. There's a little more description of them on your handout. And if you could just put a star next to the 2 that are most interesting to you.
Mrs. Keller.
Yes, sir.
I'm kind of confused by,
So the typical standard is like effect size of 0.5 would be 1 year's growth in 1 year's time.
okay.
So that's sort of our like If it's around 0.5, it's effective. And anything above that is like really, really good. That's a good question. Oh, good. It is to me. I'm like thankful for that little fish steak, at least for some point.
Students in here, I'd be scared.
It's like most of us have gotten a couple stars placed on our page. For me, I was like, if I'm gonna look at motivation, which was my priority whenever I started working with Shauna Angelo and all of the science of teaching and learning, I'm going to self-efficacy and effort-based attributions because they have the highest effect size. So if I'm gonna spend my time on it, I wanna get the most bang for my buck. And that was my thinking around it. Also, self-efficacy and effort-based attributions have very similar descriptions. So it felt like they would complement each other really well. For me, effort-based attributions is like, do students understand how their efforts are going to affect their outcomes? So do they understand that they can't just study for an hour? The hour that they spend has to be effective studying practices, or the outcome won't be what they're hoping for. Are students able to predict or expect a reasonable outcome based on a reasonable measurement of their effort and the actions that they took? So when we look at motivation today, those are the two spaces that I really am zooming in on. When I read this research, I was like, okay, give me some resources on how I can help students connect their actions that they're taking to the outcomes that they're getting. And I found this book by Sandra McGuire, Teach Students How to Learn. And so we're going to look at some of the things out of this book I've copied for you. Some background or context. She is a college professor in a southern state. I kind of want to say Louisiana, but now I can't remember. And she works with a lot of athletes who have gotten to college because they're good athletes, not because they're good students. And so she spent a lot of years figuring out how to help these guys get through college so that they could be productive members of society after they were done playing sports. So that's her background. And so when we look at some of these things, I felt like, well, these are things that I'm expecting my high schoolers to know how to do, and she's having to teach college kids how to do them. So maybe I need to take a step back and look at my expectations, and maybe I need to teach some things explicitly. Okay, so I'm going to summarize for us. To employ this strategy, you need to make a clear connection between effective learning strategies and their results. You need to do this after students recognize a need for different learning strategies. So her method, she waits until they bomb their first test so that they're open to these strategies. And I'm not saying that everybody has to do it that way, but she waits until they recognize for themselves that they have a need. And then she uses inventories to have students reflect on their specific actions, not necessarily their effort level. Because sometimes, or oftentimes, we can confuse effort with time investment. So we're going to look at a few things. Number one, she asks to make a clear connection between the strategies students are using and their results. So I have some of my own student examples there, but first I'd like you to look in your handout to some of her examples. She gives this list out to her students. Like, again, they've already bombed the first test. They know they need help. And so she says, listen, I've got this set of strategies. I'm willing to share them with you. And here are the results that they've gotten other students. And so this is multiple classes. It looks like a lot of chemistry, calculus, history, trig. So she's demonstrating like this works regardless of the content. And then she has some results from a specific AP physics class that it works for multiple students as well. So it's not content specific, it's not student specific. These are actions that work. And then I wanted to display these because the way that I interpreted that in my classroom, I asked students when we're taking tests to not just show me their work, but to identify the main topic of the question. Much to Grimson's chagrin, I'm sure he's seen these in his class.
I think it's a good idea. This is how you show your work, this is how you show your understanding. It's too much.
Right.
Usually what they complain about, but it's, if you know where you are, the better off you are.
Exactly, and it does take a lot of effort. That's why it feels so much. But then I show these 3 different examples to my students, and this student got a 1 out of 10, this student got a 4 out of 10, this student got a 10 out of 10. And I pull these very specific examples because like this person clearly didn't spend a ton of time. They identified the representation. Okay, that's a good start. These 2 people both have like a lot of writing on their page. So then we can talk about with the class, well, what is the difference between what they're saying or what they're writing? Because it's not just the amount of space you take up that gets you a good score. What's the difference between what this person is saying and what this person is saying whenever they've identified the kind of question? Well, you guys obviously haven't seen the midterm, but this person repeated the question. They summarized the question, but they didn't identify the main idea. This person identified the main idea, but they didn't include any details about the main idea. This person has the main idea, and if you look, they match graph, table, table with this person. But they took the extra step to say, what do I know about graphing? I know how to apply function notation to a graph. I know change of y over change of x equals slope, and I know how to find my y-intercept. And then they're able to apply those key components to solve the problem. Now, this takes a lot of backup work. We talk a lot about key features of different representations, and we do a lot of recall practice with that. So this isn't like their first hit with it. But the main idea of putting this up in front of the classroom is like, so this student can see, I did get a 1 out of 10, but I actually was on the right track. I did label all of those things. I just need to spend a little more time thinking about what do I know? What are the key features about those things? And then maybe I can have a little more success. And this student can say, well, I put in a lot of time and effort to write all that out, and I still failed the midterm. Well, they can see they did put a lot of time. They just didn't use the right strategies. They didn't invest their time in the right way. So first idea, we have to help them find connections between the strategies that actually work and getting the results that they expect. And then we can teach them effective learning strategies explicitly. This is also in your handout, and I will spare you reading all of this to you. But these are some tips that Sandra McGuire has passed on to her students that have demonstrated like they are extremely effective repeatedly across content, across students. So she teaches them the study cycle explicitly. She asks them to do things like skim the chapter before they get to class, to actually go to class, because these are college students that she's talking to. But when you're at class, you'll notice it says answer and ask questions and take meaningful notes. So don't just show up, be an active participant. And then I'll let you guys kind of peruse the rest of that, but these are the things that I was like expecting my high school kids to know. And they may not necessarily know them. I have to teach those to them explicitly. So she teaches them studying tips. She also teaches time management strategies explicitly. And those are on the next page. She's just got a summary there to keep a calendar. Our high school kids don't have paper planners anymore. And I, as a grown person with a lot of coping strategies, still have to have a paper planner to be successful. And then on their weekly calendar, their planner, make sure they're including the important events, like I have a volleyball game, or I have a band concert, I have an appointment, I'm not going to be at school. So taking the time to put all of that down visually in front of you. And then she has a commitment for studying that would not be reasonable for our high school students, but I do think we should talk to our students about what is reasonable, how much time they should be spending studying. Starting homework as soon as possible, and prioritizing according to your needs and wants. I talk to my kids about, like, some of you in this classroom want an A. Some of you in this classroom want a C. And it's okay. We get to have different expectations for ourselves, but you need to know what your priorities are and make decisions accordingly. And then she also teaches testing strategies explicitly. So this is just on the next page in your handout if you want to be able to see it a little better. Again, I don't think I want to use our time reading all of these to you, but just to know that you have this as a resource, some specific exam prep tips, followed by some explicit day of testing tips. And then probably my favorite feature, some explicit what to do when you get your test back instructions.
I like to read directions very carefully.
Did you guys ever have the teacher that gave you the quiz of, like, read all the directions and then the last one it was like, don't complete anything on the quiz?
Yeah.
I still remember it.
Sign your name, sit there quiet.
Yes, yes. Oh, going the wrong way. Still going the wrong way. There we go. Okay, and then she includes inventories for student reflection, so I have a copy of that for you as well. What I really wanted you to notice about the inventory is it's very specific about what were your actions. So it's not like, I tried really hard, I gave my best effort, I think I did well. It's not those kinds of questions. It's like, I preview the material before I go to class. I rework homework problems and questions before the test or quiz. I make diagrams or draw mental pictures of the concepts. So she's very specific. And then this is an example of how I've translated that in my Algebra 1 class. So I will have students do a review, and then I post the answer key because I want them to be able to check their work. And I tell them it's not for a grade, but I am going to have you turn it in, and I'm going to mark collected or not in the grade book because I want to know if there's a correlation between you doing the review and getting a good grade or not. And also, when your parent calls because you're failing, I want to be able to tell them whether you're doing this or not. So I prep with, like, it's not a grade, so what you rate yourself is not affecting your grade. Please just be honest. And then I give them this code. And, like, obviously the most effective thing would be that you completed the review on your own, you checked the answers with the answer key, and you corrected the problems you got wrong. Down to, I just copied the review from the answer key. And I tell them, I'm not saying that that's worthless. There is some value in at least doing that. But I just want you to rate yourself, and then I look for correlations, and then I show them the correlations so that they can just start to see what it requires to be effective. Okay, sorry I made this kind of combobbled, but if you could flip back to the front, the very beginning of your handout there. If you would just think about like one strategy that you might be able to use to help increase student motivation through self-efficacy or student-based attributions. We've talked about study habits, testing habits, and time management strategies. Yeah.
So, since it seems like there's so many more teachers nowadays that are doing the, oh, I'm gonna just let them do test corrections. It doesn't matter if they pass or fail it the first time, they can do test corrections. How are we getting them to take ownership in that first initial effortful thinking and acquisition of it? So it's, I got this down, I understand it, I don't have to repeat it or
Right.
visit Mr. Cannon's class
Right.
twice, 3 times, whatever.
Yeah, that's a super great question, and there is like a strong movement towards corrections.
Yeah.
I think the two things that I would say is I like the idea of corrections in that we say the consequence for not doing it well the first time is having to go back and do it well.
Right.
I like that idea. I also try to balance that with talking to my students about, listen, you're putting effort in on one end or the other.
Right.
You're either going to put effort in studying and being prepared and doing it well the first time, or you're coming back and putting effort in corrections. So you decide. Where do you want to put in the effort? So that, I mean, I try to balance. I'm not saying that's the right answer. That's just
Okay.
what I do.
It's one of those that I get to see so many of the students that come in, I'm going to do test corrections, or, hey, you bombed that test. Are we going to do test corrections?
Right.
Are you going to work on the test corrections? No, I don't want to. Well, you're failing the class now. Well, yeah, I know.
Right.
You want to take it again? No. Then why didn't you do the test corrections? Or do pass it the first
Right.
time at least?
And that is the struggle, is like sort of that apathy, and then our job is trying to figure out, like, when we looked at those 6 components of motivation, which one of these things are they struggling with? You know, like we
Yeah.
just talked about self-efficacy and student-based attributions, but maybe it's a different component that they're
Okay.
struggling with that we could try to tap into. But it's, again, like that is an exhausting job
Yeah.
to try to figure that out for over 100 students. You know, I'm not saying that it's possible for us to do that for every single one, but if we can do some like universally designed strategies that help 80% of them,
Yeah.
then I feel like hopefully we're doing our job.
Yeah. Well, that makes
Well, I was gonna say, it's interesting, like, the effort-based, attributions and the student expectations. I mean, I think they need to see large scale and small scale. So large scale, like their efforts in school, and what are those specific outcomes?
Mhm.
What's gonna happen if they don't graduate? You're really struggling with motivation, right?
Yeah.
So big scale, what happens if you're a good athlete and you don't keep your grades up? You can't
What a
play
great point.
in college, but I don't think our school does a good enough job of that. And then, of course, micro for each lesson.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
yeah.
this is the artistic process.
Yes.
Exactly the artistic
That's
process.
so cool. I didn't know that
Yeah.
correlation.
Yeah, but I don't specifically, explicitly teach that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I need to go through and say, this is the artistic process, this is what happens, here are the results, look at, and have like visuals to go along with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think,
that would be so cool.
but look at something big scale, small scale.
Yes, I agree with that. There's like a macro picture
Mhm.
and a micro picture. And I'll admit I'm better at looking at the micro picture, but I have a friend that, well, it's Cicely Brown. She is so good at looking at like the big systems and looking at the macro view. Like maybe we should pull her in, see how she could help us put that on a macro scale for her. Because I completely agree. Our students, I would argue that most of our students aren't making the connection between their efforts and the habits they're building now as high school students and their adult life.
Yeah, like the test corrections, why it
Yeah.
matters to pass the test.
Yeah.
Why you turn something in on time if you don't develop those habits? How often are you going to be late on a phone bill? How often are you going to be late with rent?
Right.
Or little things like that that you don't think about, but then you get dinged with a reconnect fee.
Right.
Oh, hey, that's an extra $30 or $50 that you now don't have.
Right.
So,
I know my college algebra kids were laughing at me because I was supposed to post this answer key, and I'm not joking, I had to do it 3 times because I lost the first 2. And so I'm in the class and they're waiting on me to post this answer key, and I'm like, listen, even when you're a grown up, if you lose your work, you gotta redo it. Like, it's just a thing. Yeah, those are really good points. Thank you, guys. Okay, I'd like to move into talking about elaborate encoding and productive struggle. So now I'd like to think about where those things fit inside the bigger picture of how our brains work whenever we learn something. And I guess I need like a really big bracket because they always cover a lot of areas of the model. But elaborate encoding and productive struggle really encourage more time in working memory. That's our primary goal with those 2 pieces. And as we know from Deans of Impact work, the more time we can spend effortfully thinking about something, the better probability that we're going to store that in long-term memory, and that we'll be able to store in multiple places, make multiple connections, so that it's easier to recall in the future. Okay, so we're going to do a little activity. After all of the stuff from Sandra McGuire, there's a page that says elaborate encoding. You guys can flip over to that table of words. And I am going to have you guys count all, like the number of vertical letters and the number of letters with diagonals in each word.
Letters with vertical swipes and letters with diagonals.
Yes. And I'm going to have you guys look at each word and decide if it gives you a positive or negative feeling and why. Okay?
Any direction? Or just positive, just negative?
No. Oh, we're doing position graphs in a minute, so you just hang on to that.
Do you want us to do it together?
It's up to you guys. But I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do that. Oh gosh, we are turning that off. Oh no. There we go. Oh look, we really creeped out the little swaying guy.
I'm sorry, am I counting individually or together?
Let me come look at what you're
Does this
doing.
number have a vertical swipe? This many have a diagonal swipe, or just how many total with either?
How many total with either? I don't know why it's still playing. My computer is on no sound.
Because this is not on the side. Yeah.
Hopefully that wasn't too distracting. Okay, that's time. So now if you could either cover that up or just flip your handout down like that, go to some blank part of your handout and write down as many of the words as you can remember. So just write down all the words you can remember without looking is basically the idea. All right, we'll take another 10 seconds or so. Okay, check your list. See how many of those you remembered correctly.
11.
Okay, Grimson with 11 out of 12. That's good.
I have 13. Oh, I was gonna say I have 13.
Out of 12? Is it out of 12?
Out of 15.
Oh, out of 15. Okay. All right, what you got?
I got one.
How about you,
Too many.
Mr. Hike? 4.
I wrote
Okay.
down 2.
Oh, and I got 10.
And Pepper got 10. Okay, what do we notice? Oh, very good. I feel like every time I do an experiment, I'm like, what if it doesn't work? What if somebody's got like photographic memory or something? But I think the point is well illustrated. Those of you that were thinking about the meaning of the word and how that impacts you as a person, your prior experiences, were able to remember considerably more than those of you that were counting letters. Like, same investment of time, very different outcomes. So if we could just take a minute to think about what were 2 similarities between the 2 groups and what were 2 differences? Like when you think about the parameters of your work, whenever you think about like the outcomes of your work, just in general, when you think about the task, what were things that were similar between both of you and what were things that were different?
They were just looking at like this word, the positive connotations for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume that
Share.
Yes.
Okay, well, we both had to sort them into 2 groups, and we both had the same amount of time.
Great.
So,
Anybody have different similarities? Both have the same number of words. Both had to recall.
Yeah.
All right. What about differences?
I would assume this group seemed to have gotten done faster with our sorting
Okay.
than they.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there was also sometimes when I was like looking at a letter and I was like, is that a diagonal swipe or more of a curvy swipe?
Okay. All
I was
right.
getting lost in the details a little bit.
Okay. Okay. Fair. That's a good point. Lost in the details of it. Anybody have any other differences?
we were focused on the visual of the item, like thinking of the item and how it made us feel, and they were focused on just the actual
Parts.
visualization of the thing.
Yes. This is like you guys had a task without much meaning.
Right.
And you guys were connecting to your own feelings and your own experiences. And whenever it was time to, like literally 30 seconds later, when it was time to recall that information, how much more powerful was the time you guys spent making meaning versus the time you guys spent practicing rotely, is what I call it. Like you did a thing, you did what I told you to do for the time I told you to do it, but it wasn't an effective practice. So even doing something like that with our kids to show them that how we're spending our time matters as much as the fact that we're spending time.
Back to following.
Oh, good. It's back to following me. That's great. Okay, so a major takeaway, time spent in working memory is always valuable, but it should be time spent thinking elaborately, thinking effectively, thinking effortfully. And some pieces that made this elaborate thinking for this group was that they were making meaning and they were connecting the new information to prior knowledge and experiences. Wow, time goes by so fast when we're having fun. So really, we are down to 15 to 30 minutes because they said I could let you out at 11:30 if we were done. Okay, I'm going to run through this. I wanted you guys to participate in these examples so you could see how it feels to make meaning out of things, but for time's sake, we're just going to look at them. Does that sound okay to you? Okay, so also Grips is familiar with standard form. So this is literally something that we did last week in my class. We were looking at the standard form of linear function, and I wanted them to connect. The objective for the day was to be able to graph a linear function if they were given the equation. So I wanted them to connect the equation with the graph. So I just asked them to look at it and like, where do they see the connections? That was my prompt. And then I asked them to write down any connections that they saw. And then, okay, based on those connections, what's your just first guess of how you might graph a standard form equation? And a lot of students said, oh, it's the 8. You just put the 8 on the x and y axis. Okay, let's challenge that guess a little bit. Using your guess, graph this line. Just take your best guess at a sketch. And those are 4s instead of 8s. So what happened? Oh, there's a connection between the 2 and the 8. And I'm not telling them this. They are looking at the representations and having to come up with ideas on their own and discuss those ideas. And then I'm like, okay, let's update our thinking a little bit. Let's give her another try. What's this graph going to look like? And then you probably get half and half. You know, some of them are able to make the connection, some of them not. It's like, okay, now we think we pretty much have it down. Go ahead and sketch this one with completely different numbers. Most of them get it right at that point. And it's only after we make meaning and connections that then I come in with, here's the steps to graph a standard form equation. Put this in your notebooks. And then, like the next day, we come in and look at what happens when the coefficients are negative. You know, like you play with the different scenarios that they might run into. But the idea is that we're spending time making meaning out of the numbers and the connecting different representations. Okay, I was going to do another really fun example with position graphs, and it was all because I knew Cannon was coming, and I know he teaches physics, but if you will just go to the position graph, like in your notes it says position graph example. So I use this for calculus whenever we start talking about particle motion. And you can graph like either horizontal or vertical position of a particle. And I used a barrel race pattern to talk to them about position. And so like you start here, your horse starts here at the gate, and you move to this first barrel, and this is an important point, so I think I called it like T1. And then you go here, and there's T2, T3. Got to decide how I would run that pattern. Oh, I sort of messed that up there, but.
That's fine.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I made sure all the students knew what a barrel pattern was. I was fully prepared to show them a video, but they assured me they all knew what a barrel pattern was. And so then we just talked about this. Okay, if I'm starting here at the origin, that represents my starting position. So how am I going to show that I'm moving to the right of my starting position? I go up in the positive territory. And then, like, how do I show that at this point, T1, I'm going back towards the left. I've changed directions. Well, I decrease. That's how I show that I'm moving directions. I change from a positive slope to a negative slope. And I stay at that negative slope all the way until I get to the origin. I get back in line with where I started, and then something significant happens. I cross the x-axis. And so with my calculus kids, we talk about it. This doesn't necessarily mean a like positive motion, or I got to think about how I say this clearly to you guys, because I got to think about what they always mess up. Oh, yes, this is what they mess up. They think that this means like you're always moving forward, and this means you're moving backwards. But they have to think about not only forward and backwards, or positive and negative, right and left motion. They have to think about where am I at in relation to where I started. So if I'm below here, then we are to the left. You guys, I still have to do this. I'm to the left of my position, my original position. And if I'm above here, I'm to the right. And then what does it mean to be increasing or have a positive slope? That means I'm moving towards the right. What does it mean to have a negative slope? It means I'm moving towards the left. And after we sort of make that foundational understanding with the first barrel, then we go through the rest of the barrel and we confirm the patterns that we're seeing. And then after I demonstrate that, then I'm like, okay, here's a blank axis, here I am. Graph my motion. And so I like move back and forth across the room, and they have to graph it. And then I say, hey guys, here's a position graph. You go stand at the front of the room and you show me the position changes that this graph is showing. So we work through like these difficult concepts. I really try to make sure that I'm including time to make meaning, something they already know like the barrel pattern, and I try to connect it to a more efficient system, because actually thinking is the slowest, least efficient system that we have as humans. So if we can include something like visuals or movements, something that's a little more efficient of a system, that can help aid students through those sticky ideas that are hard to think about. And then another elaborate encoding strategy that you might use is whenever you read a text. I had a social studies text in here. One way to get students to think deeply about things is to ask them to pause every so often and summarize. And I feel like our kids do that a lot, but a way that you could make that more engaging and actually a little more, requires a little more deeper thinking, is don't allow them to use words. So when they summarize, they have to use a quick sketch. Right? Super fun. So like this first paragraph is talking about, the main title is Revolution in Agriculture, and this first paragraph talks all about the shift after the Civil War and how much more farming happened because we shifted from hand labor to machine labor. And so they might draw a shovel to a tractor. They might draw like something that represents the Civil War to them. I don't know. So you're asking them to not just like copy words down because they think copying words means summarizing. you're asking them to draw a sketch of the main idea. Okay, so just to reiterate, what makes these examples elaborate or elaborate thinking? It's the fact that we're asking them to make meaning and we're connecting info to prior knowledge and experiences. There's just a few other elaborate encoding strategies. Dual coding is really what I just talked about, is using words and pictures to make sense of something. Elaborative interrogation is like similar to self-questioning, but you do it with partners. So you might have students come up with questions, and then they get in partners and interrogate each other. They work back and forth that way. You can ask students to organize learning by concept mapping, and I do that often. Because there's just so much information they're trying to think about and organize. Yeah, it's like a lot. And I tell them all the time, they have 7 classes in a day. If I were reading 7 different books in a day and trying to make sense out of all of them, I would have to pause and organize my thinking a lot too. And then, like if you just ever wanted some different ideas, generative learning strategies is a really like umbrella phrase that you could look up or Google or whatever to come up with some different ideas. And then this is back to Sandra McGuire. These were some of her elaborate encoding / metacognition strategies, and several of them are ones that we just talked about. But a few that weren't there that I really liked was do your homework without using the solved examples as a guide, without using the answer key. Wait until after to check that. Teaching material to a real or imagined audience. I literally would be, more often in middle school than I do in high school, but I would be like, okay, let's pretend you're going home and telling your younger sibling who has never been in this classroom about this idea. And then I'd have them like sketch out what they would say to them. And then creating practice exams is also a really effective, elaborate strategy. Okay, between now and Thanksgiving break, can you name 2 to 3 topics that you're going to be teaching that are like essential learnings? I'll give you 2 minutes to think about that. Alternatively, you could name some essential learning topics that you've already taught that students seem to struggle with. You could try to finish up that thinking in the next 15 seconds. Okay. We are going to come back to that list that you made and hopefully connect a few strategies to that, but I want to dig into productive struggle as it relates to elaborate encoding a little bit first. I had hoped to be able to give you guys like a little bathroom break because we've been sitting in meetings all morning. But we, if it's okay with you, are just going to try to push through this last 10 minutes. Are we good? Okay. Okay, so I want to look at rote encoding versus elaborate encoding just to emphasize the difference. If you look at these two options, the option one is very traditional. This is how we did math growing up versus option two. They're asking the students to practice the same thing. But just drawing on your experience of like making meaning of words versus counting diagonal letters in words, I think it's easy to see how number two allows students to connect with the work that they're doing as opposed to number one. Like I'm telling you, I was the kid that would have been like 16, 16, 16, 16, 16. Cool, that wasn't hard, moving on. Wouldn't have even looked at the add-ins. Wouldn't have drawn any pattern at them whatsoever.
Right.
As opposed to number two is forcing you to examine the patterns. Okay, so we're going to skip this so we can get rolling. I was going to have you guys pull out the differences as opposed to me telling you. But please know that elaborate encoding essentials include students being motivated because it is hard work to think elaborately. It is not just a sit and get situation. That would include multiple representations. For math, that might mean graphs, equations, tables, real world problems. But I also want you to think about like connecting content with skills and content with understandings and knowing that all of those pieces work together. And then I would also ask you to think about like whenever another essential item is finding and applying patterns. And when you ask them to apply patterns, try to do that in multiple representations as well. Challenge them, like go to the areas that you know they're going to make a mistake on, or even go to areas where you know the pattern doesn't work on purpose and have them try to apply those there. And then I want to make sure that we are all on the same page. Rote encoding does not equal bad teaching. There is absolutely a place for practice. It's just, well, we're going to look at the next slide to talk about it. Okay, so productive struggle and its role in elaborate encoding. I think we've probably, most of us have been exposed to like, if it's too easy, it's boring. If it's too difficult, it's frustrating. But there's this like just right place. And we want to try to design our lessons so that most students find themselves in the just right place. And that would be productive struggle. If they aren't struggling a little bit, they're not learning, they're practicing something they already knew how to do. So we want to try to provide that for most students. And to provide tasks that allow for productive struggle, you want to balance the difficulty and the complexity experienced by each student. And so just to make sure like we're thinking about this, we're using the same language. Complexity would be like the level of thinking required, and difficulty is the amount of effort required. So some examples are like analyzing a historical document for, purpose, message, and audience represent greater cognitive complexity than just describing the document. And then when we're talking about difficulty, like responding to 25 questions is more difficult than 1 or 2 questions. So that's how we're using the language, complexity and difficulty right now. So here's where it ties all together. We want to try to maintain this balance so that things are not boring, nor are they frustrating. And so if we're looking at new content, new skills, new understanding, we want to increase that complexity. We want them to think deeply about things. We want them to make meaning. We want them to really dig into things. So we better decrease the difficulty. And by that I mean the workload. Like I'm not going to ask students to think complexly about 20 math questions a day. I'm going to ask them to think complexly about 2 to 4. I use that for elaborate encoding when I'm having them encounter new information. Now, when I want them to rote practice, like we need to recall, we need to remember how to do things, then I'm going to decrease the complexity. Maybe they don't have to think so elaborately, but they should be practicing skills-based things. And I am backwards from most teachers because the skills-based practice without word problems, without context, that comes at the end of my unit, not at the beginning. It's after they've made sense. Then they get to practice skills. And that's a great place for rote encoding, when you want them to practice something they already learned. And then just a reminder to get practices with multiple representations in between those two places. Okay, here are some of the elaborate encoding strategies we talked about and their associated effect size, which I don't think I put in your handout. I'm sorry. I can share these slides with you. But what I would like for you to do is go back to those two things that I asked you to write down, like what are two essential learnings that you're going to teach or you have taught and students have struggled with them. And I just want you to think about what are some strategies you could use to incorporate one or multiple of motivation, elaborate encoding, productive struggle. And I am intentionally playing the Mission Impossible song for that. Would it be more helpful if I put the slide up with the strategies again? Okay. Oh, shoot. That's challenging, but you think like maybe in a minute you could wrap that up? Yeah? Okay. try to come back together in 15 seconds. All right, to try to get us out of here and just respect everybody's time, we are not going to do this, but I do want you to know that this is how I wanted you to end this little time that we spent together, because it really does it provides an opportunity for you to summarize and kind of prune the things that were not applicable to you or that you did not think would be helpful, and highlight the things that you may want to use or you may want to find out more about those things. And so I was going to have you create a concept map and leave that open to you as to what you wanted that graphic organizer to look like, but make sure that you had included these key elements. So this is one way that I try to provide students with like some autonomy to choose what kind of graphic makes the most sense to me, but also some accountability to, like, hey, these were the key ideas. I'm drawing you back to these main ideas. Make sure you use those. So, I also want to say that I feel like teaching is a scientific art, and that science is so helpful for us to know in general what works really well and where we can spend our time, because that is such a precious commodity. But it's also an art as to what that looks like in your specific classroom with your specific students. So if this felt a little bit like she didn't really ever tell me do this thing, that was on purpose, because the way that I do it is just one way to do it. And I think it's really like a beautiful symphony that our students get to experience the way that we each do it differently. And I wouldn't ever want, well, like this thing happens in the horse industry where like they decided this is the standard of a halter horse and this is what a halter horse should look like. And then all the horses started looking like that. And it was like, well, that is a beautiful horse, but it doesn't help me on the ranch, or it doesn't help me with other events that I might want to participate in. And there's something lost when we say, this is what it looks like. And so I did not want to do that for you guys. I just hoped to give you enough examples so that you could be like, oh, okay, this is what it might look like in my room. So that was the point of that. And I have a few different books up here if you want to look through any of those books as you guys get ready to go. This is the actual How Learning Works playbook. If you choose to take the class, this is the primary resource. And this is a really great book, Spark. This is why we make our kids work out before they take the PSAT. And this book is Emotions, Learning, and the Brain. Mary Helen Immordino Yang does some wonderful research. And this is a lovely book about, like, we kind of expect them to check their emotions at the door, but that's not actually possible, and how we can use that to our benefit. Stop Talking, Start Influencing just has some really powerful, quick things about how our brains work, and some fun, like the little word experiment that I did with you guys. This has several little things you can do with students. And then we talked a lot about Andrew McGuire. So yeah, that's what I have for you guys.